Baghdad, Iraq, site of so many conflicts in recent years. Dictators, foreign invasion, civil war. The scars of history run deep on this landscape. With a population of some 8 million people, it's the 4th largest in the Middle East. Yet, this isn't the first great city to dominate the southern Mesopotamian plains. Not by a long shot. Heading out into the scorched deserts to the southeast of the city, it doesn't take long until great earthen mounds line up on the horizon. For this is a land of tells. Vast man-made hills built up from the refuse of thousands of years of occupation. Still standing guard over the country they once ruled. Now desolate, remote. Halfway between Baghdad and the Persian Gulf, just to the southwest of the town of Nasiriyah, stands one of the greatest of all those mounds. Once, long ago, the wide banks of the Euphrates passed by here, though little evidence of that can be seen now. The great life-giving river having forsaken the place more than 2,000 years before, leaving just rubble, dirt and bones. And that's how it remained for more than 2,000 years. Wind and time burying the place entirely. By the mid-19th century, however, strange artefacts began to show up in nearby markets. A great revolution in archaeology was taking place at the time. And due to the painstaking efforts of an entirely new branch of scholarship, Assyriology, the ancient script on many of the items, cuneiform, was deciphered, allowing an unprecedented glimpse into that world before, so long ago. And what the scholars read of that great mound by Nasiriyah completely boggled the mind. Its name was Ur, and it had been mentioned in the Bible as the very place where Abraham, progenitor of 3 of the great world religions, had been born. Before heading forth with his wife and children to wander the world after the city's demise. At the time, the fledgling field of archaeology mostly concerned itself with collecting tablets and artifacts from ancient sites for further investigation elsewhere. But by 1920, new, more vigorous scientific styles were favoured. And for the first time, a comprehensive investigation of the city itself would be attempted. The man to lead that mission was Leonard Woolley. He'd worked under the pioneering discoverer of Minoan Crete, Sir Arthur Evans, and more recently numbered the famous Lawrence of Arabia in his team. Accompanying Woolley went Max Mallowan and his soon-to-be wife Agatha Christie, who'd later write a book inspired by the journey. The world was watching. It was to be one of the most famous of all archaeological expeditions, unearthing some of the greatest treasures ever found in the ancient world, matching that of Tutankhamun's tomb. Almost immediately, Woolley confirmed the city to be a major centre of the Sumerian culture of the early Bronze Age. Excavations would continue for another 14 years, revealing continuous occupation of the site from around 5000 to 500 BC. At its height, the city had been home to approximately 65,000 people, one of the greatest the world had ever seen. Though European work in the Middle East had begun as an effort to find the origins of the Hebrew Bible, it ultimately revealed so much more. Revolutionizing our understanding of the Sumerian world. Immensely elaborate graves of citizens, kings, and queens. A culture surpassing even Egypt in its antiquity and importance. Thousands upon thousands of graves were uncovered at filled with a vast array of objects, revealing links all across the known world. One vast royal cemetery in particular, dated to around the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, was the most spectacular ever found. Gold, lapis lazuli, cornelian, chlorite, bronze, silver, and other semi-precious stones flowed out along with expertly crafted items, musical instruments, and more. A world so much older than the Bible was unlocked. The apogee of the Sumerians. Woolley and those who followed him were able to construct an incredible account of ancient wealth and privilege. Like Queen Puabi, whose grave goods can still be seen today. And wasn't alone. Just one of a glittering collection of metropolises. In the span of barely a millennium, the Sumerians had established mankind's first real urban centres. With towering walls and religious sanctuaries known as ziggurats, the skyscrapers of their day. Building arguably the world's most advanced civilization. In a landscape entirely devoid of natural resources, the Sumerians radically improved farming and irrigation techniques, resulting in larger surpluses of grain and an increase in the overall food supply. Ultimately allowing many within their society to put down their ploughs and pursue other endeavours, such as advanced mathematical and scientific knowledge. Perhaps the most famous of all Sumerian inventions, though, was the development of a complex system of writing. First used for bookkeeping, and then later on to record their own history. all of these innovations helped to lay the foundation for some of the most powerful and wealthy city-states the world had ever seen, whose rulers presided over small but significant kingdoms. Within just a few centuries of Queen Puabi, however, by the 24th century BC, this prosperity was already coming to an end. From its very beginnings, civilization has been incredibly elitist. Far from everyone benefiting from the splendor of the first cities. In fact, most people didn't at all. And by around 2400 BC, the world of ancient Sumer came to a breaking point. Texts uncovered from Sumerian city-states such as Lagash indicate that there was a massive chasm between the wealthy, often hailing from the hereditary priestly class, and the impoverished common people. Most of the latter being so mired in debt that they had to sell their own children into slavery in an effort to pay it off. Though not as well documented, it's believed that similar circumstances were prevalent in the other city-states too. Sometime between the years 2350 and 2340 BC, though scholars debate the exact date, a new type of ruler became king of the city-state of Umma. Lagash's great rival. The two had been fighting armed conflicts for centuries, with Lagash generally being the victor. Perhaps out of spite or the desire for revenge, this new ruler brutally attacked Lagash and is said to have massacred many of its people, as well as destroying its great temples. He then went on to conquer and annex other city-states, ultimately claiming to have forged an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Most scholars, though, don't take Lugal-Zagazi at his word. He really may only have controlled the city-states of Sumer, which in itself would have been a remarkable achievement. Had he done this, he would have created the first true world empire in history. But unfortunately for him, that honour would go to another. Not a Sumerian, but one whose origins lay further to the north. A land also remembered in the Bible. Akkad. Though his birth name is not known, he would later call himself Sharu Kin, meaning legitimate king. We know him by a different name. Sargon, the first great king of the Akkadian Empire. Generally regarded as history's first. Within just a few hundred years, the Sumerians would be forgotten, eclipsed by another power, revered by every state to arise in the region for 2,000 years to come. This is the history of that empire. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Hello, and welcome to History Time. As always, I'm your host, Pete Kelly. Currently in my underground secret laboratory working on new videos. The research for this one was undertaken by the great History with Sai. Go check out his channel for everything ancient history. Now, I'm still mostly a one-man team when it comes to making these things, and they take years to make. So I'm sure you won't mind me taking a moment to thank the sponsor of this one. It's Magellan TV, a long-time supporter of the channel. Like Netflix for scholars, Magellan TV has a library of thousands of documentaries to choose from. Space, geography, history, science, it's all here. Streamed seamlessly to any device you choose. When I'm stuck for new ideas, I often put something on from their playlists. From the Bronze Age to outer space, there's something here for everyone. One in particular that I recently enjoyed, and a playlist I often go back to, is Eternal Egypt, neighbours to the Akkadians. And there are plenty of other ancient history programmes to choose from too. And now I've teamed up with Magellan to offer you an exclusive free trial. Just click on the link in the description below. Thanks. Now, back to the ancient world. Every so often in history, an extremely capable and charismatic leader arises. And for better or worse, disrupts the world in which they live entirely, altering it forevermore. Whether Cyrus the Great of Persia in the 6th century BC, Alexander of the Greeks, or Julius Caesar 3 centuries later. The long span of antiquity has had its fair share of such figures. And more than 1,000 years before, in the 24th century BC, the very first arose. Sargon of Akkad would go on to become the most powerful ruler that had ever lived up until that time. In fact, nearly all of the future kings of ancient Mesopotamia, and even beyond, would try to imitate his style of rule, adopt his empire's efficient administrative system, and claim to be his worthy successor. Sargon was considered by those who came after to have been the model ruler and the epitome of all that a man could and should be. Like Charlemagne and King Arthur in centuries to come, he was the archetypal king who lived long and well. Yet, despite all of his great achievements and fame, very little is concretely known about his early life. Myth, history, and legend entwine. Given the immense chasm of time since he lived, the texts and inscriptions that archaeologists have uncovered about him are generally more legend than fact. The vast majority being Babylonian copies of originals, thought to have existed closer to Sargon's own day. Sometimes called the First Histories, compiled during the age of Hammurabi, writer of the first law code during the Old Babylonian period. These clay tablets are copies of original royal inscriptions, supposedly found on monuments from 500 years before. though a tiny handful of original monuments survive too. Seized and taken to Elam by a victorious king during the 12th century BC, where French archaeologists found them. One of the more complete copies from Hammurabi's day, believed by many to have been commissioned by Sargon himself, outlines the future king's humble beginnings. He claims to be the son of a priestess. His father, he says, is unknown. Unable to care for him, his mother put him into a covered reed basket, sending it downriver, where it was later discovered by a water drawer named Aki, who raised the child as his own. It's a story that has parallels to the early biography of Moses, as told in the Hebrew Bible. Adding to the flood myth and the Garden of Eden, concepts which also have their roots with the Sumerians. Though not telling the story of his birth, another document known as the Sumerian King List, first compiled several centuries after Sargon's death, stresses his humble roots by claiming him to be the son of a gardener. Eventually, still early on in his career, we're told that Sargon became the cupbearer of a man named Ur-Zababa, ruler of the city-state of Kish, an important northern Sumerian city. Standing upriver from all the great strongholds of the south, and existing at a time of intense riverine management, at times in its history, Kish seems to have been able to control the flow of water to a certain extent, holding the lower cities to ransom. Of course, presumably unlike his leader Ur-Zababa, Sargon was an Akkadian, speakers of an Eastern Semitic language, who occupied the regions just north of Sumer, known as Akkad. As far as the Akkadians themselves, however, not much is known about them before Sargon's reign. Most scholars believe they lived side by side with the Sumerians in many cities, being greatly influenced by their culture and religion. Today, Sumerian remains a culture and language with unknown roots, though it had fully developed by the 4th millennium BC, at vast centres like Uruk and Eridu. The very place, according to Sumerian mythology, where man was first chiselled out of the mud by the gods. The origins of the Akkadians, though, are to be found with the so-called second phase of urbanisation occurring in the mid-3rd millennium BC in Syria and northern Mesopotamia, at massive cities like Ebla. And sometimes nomadic cultures like the Canaanites and the Amorites, living on the outer limits of the Sumerian world. By Sargon's day, though, the Akkadians seem to have shared the same gods as Sumer, living more or less the same way of life. Yet, given his linguistic roots, Sargon, or at least his ancestors, were outsiders. Whether he came from the mountains or the desert is unclear, but it is he who is given credit for the foundation of a new city. Not far from Kish. He called it Agade. Agade's existence has never been in doubt, showing up in contemporary records throughout the 3rd millennium BC and onwards. However, that great city has never been found. We know roughly where it was, near Susa, at the southern edge of Sumer in the Mesopotamian lowland, a region with a lack of agricultural potential. But excellent access to the disparate peoples all around. Regions and cultures Sargon and his descendants would integrate into their own, expanding the horizons of Mesopotamia significantly. Without any archaeology to go on though, Sargon's city remains obscure. It may be that he really did create the city himself. He allegedly ruled for a ridiculously long time after all. Though some scholars now suggest his cult of personality to have become so strong that it could have caught some of the deeds of his successors in its orbit. As we know, it did those of his predecessors. For though Sargon's is often seen as a new dynasty, a break with the old, really he may have inherited concepts that came before. A continuation of the development of kingship. For this was the age of the Lugals, local headmen and warlords ruling through personal charisma and power rather than divine rule. Had it not been for the actions of one of those Sumerian kings, Sargon might never have amounted to anything at all. For just as he began his career at Kish, the king of Umma, Lugal-Zaghazi, moved his capital to the great city of Uruk, taking along the way, ultimately expanding his rule over the whole of southern Mesopotamia. Sargon is often credited with many firsts in history. The first standing army, the first land empire. But really, Lugal-Zaghazi may have been first. According to archaeological evidence and the archives of the various city-states, it was he who first ruled from the lower sea to the upper, holding sway over 50 governors and bringing an end to independent Samaria. And one of those cities he annexed was Kish. Given this burgeoning growth of militaristic Sumerian kingship by his day, it's no surprise really that Sargon had a go. He just had to cut off the head of the snake to make his play for power. A snake with many enemies. Though the details are murky, we're told that soon after Lugal-Zaghazi seized Kish, Sargon, with a band of faithful followers, directly marched on Uruk.
Sargon, the king of Akkad, the bailiff of Ishtar, the king of the universe, the anointed one of An, the king of the land, the governor of Enlil. He vanquished Uruk in battle and smote 50 governors and the city by the mace of the god Ilaba. And he destroyed its fortress and captured Lugal-Zaghazi, the king of Uruk, in battle. He led him to the gate of Enlil in a neckstock.
Taking Lugal-Zaghazi to the gate of Enlil, the holy city of Nippur, was a powerful symbolic gesture. The old king's power was clearly broken, and Sargon favoured by the gods. The old king's ultimate fate? We're not told. Unlike his early days, Sargon's reign as king, as well as the actions of his new government, are relatively well documented, much more so than most at the time. And though the records make it seem as if Sargon had an easy time conquering so many territories, holding on to them, especially the proud cities of Sumer, proved to be a challenge. Most of the city-states he claims to have controlled eventually rose up in rebellion against him. though he and his men, the beginnings of a professional army personally loyal to him, were able to put down every revolt using a combination of fear, brute force, and at times, diplomacy. Within a number of decades, Sargon was able to establish himself as the undisputed ruler of both Sumer and Akkad, as well as reorganizing and reforming many aspects of the societies he ruled.
Sargon, king of Akkad, vanquished in battle, and smote the city and destroyed its fortress. He smote its territory and Lagash as far as the sea. He vanquished in battle and destroyed its fortress.
By around 2334 BC, with the completion of Sargon's conquest, the era that scholars call the early dynastic period of Sumer comes to an end, and the Akkadian period begins. So famed was Sargon that in the 2 millennia to come, Babylonian kings used the title King of Akkad all the way down to the Persian period, the Akkadian king becoming the very embodiment of empire and kingship, what it meant to be a ruler. Lugal-Zagazi was forgotten. When European archaeologists first began excavating in Mesopotamia in the early 19th century, seeking to understand the origins of their own civilization, next to nothing was known of the ancient history of that land, besides the biblical stories, its mud brick cities having died millennia before. One by one, as the years went by, the great mounds began to be investigated, the cities of the Bible unearthed. Foremost amongst these early discoveries was the Assyrian capital at Nineveh, made famous by the early Assyriologist Austin Henry Layard. Work went on for decades, brick by brick, uncovering a vast metropolis of the Iron Age, and great amounts of information on the Assyrian era of the first millennium BC. Yet, underneath that city lay far older foundations. In 1931, the latest in a long line of astonishing discoveries was made. For 1500 years before the Assyrians, the place had originally been built by Akkadian workmen. It was in the Akkadian layers of the city that a number of artifacts were discovered. Chief amongst them, a great bronze head, thought to be part of an impressive statue of an Akkadian king. Though defaced at some point in history, today the head is rightly considered one of the great masterpieces of ancient art, providing a rare glimpse into the art style of the Akkadian world. Generally thought to represent either Sargon or his grandson Naram-Sin, in reality, almost nothing is known about the head, though it is reminiscent of similar heads from Gudea in the years following Akkadian rule. This was an age when realistic representations of humans are almost entirely unknown, making the head entirely unprecedented. This bronze artifact, precisely and expertly crafted, wasn't just a statement of the king's power, but a perpetual embodiment of his very being. More than a representation, for those who looked upon it, this statue would channel the very presence of the king himself, working as a substitute in his absence. The fact that the head was possibly still on display and defaced many centuries later during the sack of Nineveh in the 7th century BC suggests that his power lived on for more than 1,000 years after his death. Notably, the figure is very different from the usual depictions of Sumerian rulers. Generally bald with smiling, benevolent features. This statue has elaborate hair. Whether it was a wig or a new Akkadian hairstyle is unclear, but it wasn't just fashion that changed under Sargon. What he attempted in Sumer was revolutionary. For over a millennium, the ruling establishment had long consisted of priesthood and nobility, working hand in hand to control nearly every aspect of Sumerian society, especially in the cities. Often with single hereditary families controlling all aspects of temple life in their respective strongholds. When Sargon arrived, however, he broke the power of the priesthood and the noble families, replacing them with hand-picked Akkadian governors, fiercely loyal to him and him alone. The Akkadians who now controlled these estates were able to keep the vast majority of the crops and revenue for themselves, a sizable share of the new empire's wealth. Such a system also helped to ensure their loyalty to the new regime, obliging them to serve it because it now gave them a huge stake in the state's success. They'd bought in to the new system. This transfer of such productive lands also greatly diminished, if not outright destroyed, the power and influence of the former religious and ruling establishment, because up until then, such property had been their main source of income. While in most cases the Akkadian government compensated the previous owners, the estates were still forcibly taken. If there was resistance to the offer, then it's safe to say there would have been serious consequences for those refusing to make the sale. In addition to the temple estates, those loyal to Sargon were also put directly in charge of managing the main temples and religious endowments that were found in most large cities. In one instance, Sargon put his daughter, who later went by the name Enheduanna, in charge of the great temple complex of the moon god Nanna in the city of Ur, thus allowing her to directly oversee that institution's wealthy endowment and associating the new kingship with divine support. After consolidating his hold on Sumer, Sargon looked beyond his borders. Claiming to have conquered lands stretching from the western areas of Elam in what's today's southwestern Iran to the shores of the eastern Mediterranean, bringing immensely wealthy trade routes under his direct control, and providing access to others yet further away. These were diverse, far-flung lands, inhabited by people speaking many different languages and worshipping different gods, for the first time brought under the sway of a single government. Though most of the places Sargon attacked outside of Sumer can't tell their own stories, one place can. Discovered in the 1960s by Italian archaeologists, the city of Ebla had one of the largest cuneiform archives ever found, and a destruction level in the archaeological record to match Akkadian claims. Sargon may even show up briefly in the Ebla records just before the sack of the city, as the King of Kish, or father of the King of Kish, he having put his son to rule there perhaps. Once one of the great cities of the early Bronze Age, instrumental in the urbanization of Syria during the 3rd millennium BC, Ebla now became an Akkadian provincial city. With its millennia-old cities, religious institutions, and complex irrigation networks, Sumeria had arguably been the centre of civilization for centuries. And now Sargon shifted this centre northwards to Akkad by establishing his new capital on the Euphrates. It was here that he built elaborate palaces for himself and his family, as well as temples dedicated to his patron deities, most notably the goddess Ishtar. And with this new loyal city as his base of operations, Sargon began the great undertaking of governing his new empire. One of the ways he did this, a mainstay for all empires to follow through the long span of history, was through ingenious political propaganda. Boasting for the first time in history of the exact numbers his forces had killed on campaign, swearing to the accuracy of what he reported, an unheard of tactic for the time, part of a new cult of personality developed to keep his people in submission by ruling through fear and awe. One of Sargon's first acts was to make Akkadian the official language for all administrative purposes. Part of the reason for this may have been to find a common language that could unify the disparate parts of the empire, where in addition to Akkadian and Sumerian, Elamite, Hurrian, and a number of Western Semitic languages and dialects were also spoken. Sumerian was not abandoned though, with scribes still studying it and using it widely in scribal schools. But as time went on and the government promoted greater use of Akkadian, as well as resettling large numbers of Akkadian-speaking people in Sumer, it was gradually replaced as the common tongue, surviving for thousands of years more when Sumerian died out. As well as the political centre of the empire, Agade became its main commercial hub. Boats carrying goods from Dilmun and Magan, today modern Bahrain and Oman respectively, docked at its ports. Caravans stocking a variety of tradable goods flowed in from Anatolia, Elam, Arabia, and the Levant, traders setting up shop for the future. And it wasn't just Akkadians that benefited from this system. Surviving records from the Sumerian cities suggest significantly expanded horizons than those they'd had access to before. No longer middlemen, but having direct links to the other side of the world. By around 2500 BC, This burgeoning global trade system was already booming. Largely frequented by independent traders, who'd rarely, if ever, make the entire journey from east to west themselves, rather passing on goods from one region to the next. It seems that, like the Romans did much later, the Akkadians got the whole trade system, or much of it, under their direct control, succeeding where all Mesopotamians after them failed in directly controlling Elam too. And Akkadian traders went much further. At the mysterious ruins of Konar Sandal in eastern Iran, once a city of 20 or 30,000 people, part of the still largely unknown Diorite culture recently uncovered there, a clay seal from Akkad has been discovered, complete with cuneiform and two facing figures typical of Sargon and his successors. It seems Akkadian travellers came here to barter with the trader lords of Diorite, standing side by side with their contemporaries from the Indus Valley civilization. In bartering for the chlorite vessels, expertly crafted by the region's workmen. And because of these direct links with Iran, the Gulf, Egypt, and even into the Eurasian steppe, some of the earliest evidence of horses being found in the Middle East around this time. Akkad prospered. Cedarwood flowing down from Lebanon, diorite from Dilmun, grain from Sumer, tin from the mountains of Elam, lapis lazuli, chlorite and tin from far-off Afghanistan and the Indus Valley civilization. Trade ships from Malua, Mahashi and Dilmun coming into port. Due to Sargon's conquests, the world was growing larger. Alongside trade though, Agade became fabulously wealthy from the taxes that were collected from the empire's various provinces. It must have been a truly spectacular place in its day. And surely, one day, it will be found. The Sumerian king list claims that Sargon ruled for 56 years, an incredible length of time in which such a charismatic leader would have without a doubt left an indelible mark on the society that he ruled over. However, when Sargon died in 2279 BC, apparently of natural causes, several parts of the empire, especially in the Sumerian heartland, broke out in rebellion once more. Of all the artifacts of the Bronze Age world, the monuments, the statues, the inscriptions that come down to us today, few would compare to a single piece of metal casting supposedly ordered by the second monarch to rule over the Akkadian Empire. Though it didn't survive to our time, if it had, due to the sheer audacity and opulence of its construction, it surely would have been the envy of all the world. For Sargon's son and successor, Rimush, according to inscriptions referring to him, not only began to account himself amongst the gods, in a foreshadowing of the full deification of his nephew a generation later, but ordered a statue of himself to be made of pure tin. One of the rarest materials in the world, immensely expensive, largely imported into Mesopotamia from half a world away, and found only in tiny quantities in a handful of locations. The piece would be akin to a statue of pure diamond today, clearly attempting to forge divine legitimacy for the new ruling dynasty, as well as protecting their image of immense wealth and power. It may well be that, like his father before him, Rimush was forging his own cult of personality. And as we shall see, he needed it. Upon Sargon's death, almost immediately, the massive state he'd forged erupted into war and chaos. It's not known why Sargon's first son, Manishtushu, was passed over for the position of king. But given the tendency of later Mesopotamian rulers to do the same, it may be that Rimush possessed certain qualities of kingship that were desired over his brother, such as decisiveness and a certain level of ruthlessness that would be vital if the empire were to survive its founder's death. Though it may also be that due to a total lack of primogeniture or succession policy, simply the strongest ruled. And Rimush seized power from his elder brother. For Rimush, as with every Akkadian ruler, it would be a baptism of fire, with most of the major Sumerian cities rising up to fight him, including Lagash, Adab, and Umma. Clearly inheriting the strong standing army from his father, the king's retribution was swift. By his own account, Rimush tore down the walls of the rebellious cities, brutally killing several thousand Sumerian troops, while selling thousands of the survivors into slavery. But he went further too, expelling yet more thousands of non-combatants of fighting age from the defeated cities, subjecting them to cruel punishments, mass deportations, and hard labour. Documents uncovered from the city of Umma seem to confirm this, as they tell of citizens working and dying in what can only be described as labour camps. Once the rebellions had been crushed, Rimush stripped many of these cities of whatever remaining lands they had, and like Sargon, distributed them to his supporters. In one of the largest land transactions ever recorded in ancient history, in one fell swoop, the new king seized and reorganised approximately 134,000 hectares of farmland from the cities of Lagash and Umma. Lands they'd bitterly fought over for centuries, before redistributing them to the new Akkadian landholding class that his father Sargon had created just a few decades before. An entire landed class of cronies promoted by the new regime. Akkadians and Sumerians too. New men all too happy to go against the old order and tradition in order to further themselves and their families. This culture of nepotism was extremely significant because it meant that the elite and temple priesthoods of these city-states, after perhaps thousands of years, lost all claims to their ancestral lands. It was just another example of how many of the centuries-old institutions of Sumer were being dismantled as a result of the new Akkadian order. The priests had been instated by the gods, and now they were being demoted. Yet revolts continued to rage throughout Rimush's reign, in many parts of Akkad as well as the south. One of these was in the city of Kazulu on the Euphrates River. which had years before also revolted against Sargon, only to have many of its citizens butchered. Contemporary chronicles tell that the city fared no better under Rimush, whose men brutally stamped out any resistance. Akkadian texts claim that 12,000 rebel soldiers were killed, with another 5,000 sold into slavery. Cthulhu's walls were demolished. Similar accounts have also been given for campaigns in Elam, a similarly ancient region of city builders. In addition to the thousands butchered, inscriptions on various objects detail the large quantities of plunder brought back to Agade and the city of Nippur, centre of Mesopotamian religion. By the end of his reign, Rimush's success in mercilessly defeating his enemies had clearly gone to his head. Beginning to think of himself less as a man and more like a god. Soon enough, though, he would be proved to be mortal after all. Having ruled for only 9 years, Rimush fell to assassins within his own court. Allegedly using not daggers or poison, but cylinder seals, strangling him in a back room. The texts that have been uncovered so far do not state who orchestrated the murder, though, being such a brutal ruler, he had no shortage of enemies. The most likely scenario, though, is that the assassins acted under the orders of the elder brother, Manishtushu, who promptly ascended the throne, inheriting the many wars his brother had started. Around 4,260 years ago, 964 men sat down to a feast in the land of Akkad. Great pieces of mutton and pork roasted on spits, bread, olives, vegetables, and of course, vast quantities of beer flowed. And yet, all was not well. 49 witnesses stood by, ominously surveying the day's events, ready to step in if needed, no doubt. For those 964 individuals were giving up their lands in return for only 2 years' worth of harvests. The men watching may even have been those who were to be allocated this land. The second generation of a new elite. Men looking for the king's patronage, muscling in on the old landowners of the realm. And this scene, recorded on tablets during the reign of the third Akkadian king, Manishtushu, was a common one. Like the 2 kings before him, this new ruler constantly sought to expand his own household at the expense of local institutions. This is the story told by the vast amounts of administrative documents recorded on cuneiform tablets. A tale further added to by the archaeological evidence of vast administrative centres at sites like Tel Brak and Tel Leilan, apparently built in part to oversee the immense land reforms taking place. Great armies of bureaucrats recording it all. And yet, in comparison to his brother's reign, Manishtushu's seems to have been much more stable. It's possible that many at the Akkadian court preferred the new ruler to Rimush, because of an inclination to maintain peace in an empire perpetually riven apart by war. A situation perhaps added to by Manishtushu's indignation at being passed over for rule in favour of his younger brother. It may even be that Manishtushu and his court faction worked behind the scenes to remove Rimush from power themselves, perhaps even instigating an unrecorded civil war between the two men. We'll likely never know. All Manishtushu says is that Enlil called him to power. Rather than starting new wars by brutally making examples of those who rebelled, Manishtushu quietly finished his brother's conflicts, before focusing his efforts on promoting commerce and opening up trade links with places as far away as Egypt. By this time, few alive had experienced a life outside the yoke of Akkadian kingship. The archaeology suggests that the empire really did now stretch from sea to sea, an immense land empire, stretching from the borders of Anatolia to the deserts of Iran. A remarkable achievement. Many items survive from this time, from excavations all over the Middle East. And yet, one relic in particular is perhaps the best example of the immense power of these earliest emperors. The obelisk of Manishtushu. At 1.4 meters tall, this inscribed black diorite stone is a legal record, telling of the distribution of 4 pieces of land. Large estates given to the king's officers in the region of Kish. We're told in Akkadian that the stone itself was taken from Magan, across the Persian Gulf, in what is now Oman. Loaded onto boats and docked on the quay at Akkad, where the king fashioned his statue and dedicated it to Enlil. This is a material previously unknown in Mesopotamia. And then, just like his brother before him, in 2255 BC, the king was murdered. Conveniently, his son, already out on military campaign, waited patiently in the wings. He would be one of the greatest Akkadian rulers of them all, overseeing a new unparalleled age of sophistication in art, society, and commerce. This is the age of Naram-Sin. By the 6th century BC, nearly 2,000 years had passed since the heyday of the Akkadians. It would be another 2,500 years before Leonard Woolley began his excavations at Ur. Elsewhere in the world, this was the age of the Buddha, Confucius, and the burgeoning philosophers of ancient Greece. Paradigm-shifting new styles of thought during this so-called axial age. And yet, in Mesopotamia, where the great kings had never truly lost their power, just consolidating it into the strongest contender, a near unbroken line of culture still stretched back to the very first cities of the world. And at that time, Babylon was the greatest of them all. Some 200,000 occupants lived and died amidst the magnificent gardens and colonnades, centre of the all-powerful Neo-Babylonian Empire. And it was here, in the year 550 BC, that one of the first archaeological digs in history was carried out. In that year, we're told King Nabonidus led men to Sippar to uncover the foundation deposits of the temples of Samas the sun god, Anunitu the warrior goddess, and the sanctuary that Naram-Sin had built to the moon god in Haran. Nabonidus then restored all of these sites to their former glory. But he went further too, attempting to date the archaeological artefacts at Naram-Sin's sanctuary. Though his estimates were off by around 1500 years. Naram-Sin was clearly still a popular and renowned figure in Nabonidus' day. But what of that king? Why him, and not his father or uncle? Well, like Sargon, Naram-Sin was portrayed as the model warrior king. Later in his career, he'd presided over the very apogee of the state, the very heights of architecture and material goods. A time known in art history as the classical Akkadian era, to differentiate it from the earlier and later eras. And yet, he would be one of Mesopotamia's most controversial rulers too, with a scathing story later told about him. And of course, his reign began very badly, with the greatest revolt yet breaking out against the new order. It was a conflict that could have very easily stamped out the empire before it really got going. Naram-Sin describes the war as the Great Revolt, led by the cities of Kish and Uruk, then still perhaps the largest city in the world. Soon enough, most, if not all, of the cities of Sumer, along with the empire's territories in Elam and the west, called their banners, rising up en masse against their imperial overlords. According to Naram-Sin's inscriptions, it took at least 9 battles, but ultimately all of the rebel cities were defeated and order brought back to the realm. In what had now become standard practice in Akkadian warfare, the vanquished suffered tremendously. In Kish, the Euphrates River was filled with the bodies of dead soldiers who'd defended the gates of their city, while another 2,500 were slaughtered once the Akkadians breached the walls. And the destruction didn't stop there. After the fighting had come to an end, as punishment, Naram-Sin tore down Kish's walls and had the city flooded. Meanwhile, in the Sumerian heartland, Uruk led a massive rebel coalition, including the cities of Lagash, Umma, Adab, Isin, Shuruppak, and even the religious centre of Nippur. They too, especially Uruk, suffered nearly the same fate as Kish, with thousands killed. Their lofty, already ancient city walls being torn down, and in what seems to have been a hallmark of Akkadian campaigns, their cities flooded. It may seem excessive, but Naram-Sin, clearly an astonishingly capable military commander, wanted to make the point that any dissent within the Akkadian realm would be met with death and destruction. Finally, with the state under control, Naram-Sin could focus on not only ruling, but expanding his borders yet further. In the 36 years that Naram-Sin ruled, he expanded the Akkadian Empire's network territories and tributary states to their greatest extent. Roughly from the kingdom of Marhashi, believed to have been in what's today's central Iran, all the way to the waters of the Mediterranean, and perhaps even the island of Cyprus. One of his many victories is commemorated on the famous Victory Stele of Naram-Sin, in which he is seen defeating tribespeople of the Zagros Mountains, trampling the bodies of their fallen warriors. It may have been Naram-Sin who finally destroyed early Bronze Age Ebla. Inside the empire, such was his iron grip that a level of stability does seem to have been reached, allowing less warlike pursuits to be furthered. Naram-Sin, for example, was the first Mesopotamian ruler to boast of his hunting prowess, a tradition that would go on for millennia. Though, like all Akkadian rulers, he failed to integrate traditional Mesopotamian leadership with his new order. Naram-Sin's reign was the most magnificent period in the entire history of the empire, both militarily as well as economically. It's from the records of his foreign campaigns, not to mention the great monuments erected, such as his Victory Stele, that Naram-Sin is mostly remembered as a fierce warrior king. However, he was also a great builder. Along with other sanctuaries, such as that at Haran, he completely renovated ancient Mesopotamia's most famous and sacred temple, the Ekkor at Nippur, which was dedicated to the god Enlil. The building was to be the crowning achievement of his reign. Once finished, it would have been an immense sight to behold, one of the most ornate ever constructed. Documents uncovered from that city detail much of its construction activities, as well as the sheer quantity of precious metals and the number of workers involved in its renovation. Overseen by the Crown Prince, Shakali-Shari, one text records that in addition to hundreds of workers, there were at least 77 special woodworkers, 86 goldsmiths, 10 sculptors, 54 carpenters, and other groups of specialised labourers brought there from all over the empire. By this time, very few, if anyone, left alive had experienced a time before Akkadian rule. And thus, Naram-Sin dominated religion. Perhaps seeing his predecessors' downfall in their only being viewed as mortals. Naram-Sin had other ideas, seeking to claim a total monopoly over religion. He had a number of daughters, establishing them as priestesses all over Sumer, thus forging intimate links with the various temples. Naram-Sin, though, didn't just worship other gods and goddesses. He he believed himself to be a god as well. In one inscription found on a monument in the ruins of a temple, the great king wanted the world to know the following.
Naram-Sin, the mighty, king of Agade, when the 4 quarters of the earth attacked him together, through the love Ishtar bore him, was victorious in 9 battles in a single year, and captured the kings whom they had raised up against him. Because he had defended his city in crisis, the people of his city asked of him that he be the god of their city Agade. With Ishtar in Iana, with Enlil in Nippur, with Dagan in Tutul, with Nehusag in Kesh, with Enki in Eridu, with Sin in with Shamash in Sippar, with Nergal in Kutha, and they built his temple in Agade.
Yet, unlike Sargon, Naram-Sin proved to be especially unpopular in the generations to come. His self-deification, along with what many felt was his vanity, would be remembered by the authors of later epic literature as just a few of the reasons for his downfall. The most notable being the Curse of Agade, a largely fictional retelling of the fall of the empire, with Naram-Sin cast as the reason for its demise. As we've seen, the truth seems to have been far from this. Though he may have believed himself to be divine, after 36 years on the throne of Akkad, like any mortal, Naram-Sin died. Not a warrior's death in battle or from the blade of an assassin's dagger, but simply, we're told, natural causes that come with old age. Soon enough, though, everything in the empire was to change. In 2217 BC, when the new king Shakali-Shari came to the throne, the Akkadian Empire stood at the very height of its size and prosperity. Just 25 years later, only a rump state around Akkad remained. Hemmed in, beset by hostile enemies on all sides. Unfortunately, unlike his predecessors, there are relatively few inscriptions dating to his reign. So it's hard to get a clear picture of the goings-on in Mesopotamia at this time. We know he fought a bitter struggle against Gutian and Amorite invaders, amassing at the peripheries of the realm. And not long into his reign, the south finally managed to shake off Akkadian rule. Though the exact details are lost. Several revolts are mentioned in the Akkadian sources. But the outcome of these events, given the Akkadian propensity for propaganda, often remains uncertain. There were several short-lived kings ruling in Agade after Shakali-Shari's death. Though their relationship to the Akkadian dynasty of Sargon isn't clear. The final of these rulers was Shu-Durul, who later texts and traditions maintain was killed when a people from the Zagros Mountains, the Gutians, breached Agade's walls and set the city on fire. As mentioned earlier though, the ruins of Agade have yet to be found, and so this part of the story cannot yet be confirmed with archaeology. Though surely a city like Agade had to have met its end in a siege. In recent decades, a new culprit for the empire's demise is often named by a majority of scholars. Scientific data suggesting an unprecedented drought descending on the land between the two rivers. Specifically, the northern regions around Akkad, an already marginal environment at the best of times. This drought, which also may have put an end to Old Kingdom Egypt and a variety of other Bronze Age states alike, lasted for years, possibly even decades. This new lack of rain would have resulted in increased desertification, as well as a reduction in the vital flow of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, thus reducing the amount of arable land that could have been irrigated and farmed. Soon leading to famine, an overall collapse of the regional economy, and massive unrest amongst the general population. In such conditions, it would have been extremely difficult for any ruler to keep such a large state together, no matter how great. Such conditions would also have given peoples such as the Gutians an opportunity, and perhaps need to raid Akkadian lands, and ultimately make it to the capital of Agade itself, which, as later texts make clear, they destroyed, before ruling themselves as the new lords of Mesopotamia for a century or more. The story doesn't end there though, at least not in the popular Sumerian and Akkadian literature that would follow a century or two later, once some semblance of order was restored by the final Sumerian dynasty, that of Ur, which formed its own successor empire to the Akkadians. There are several legends about Sargon in particular, mostly revolving around his life and conquests, that were compiled into various mini-epics and recited by poets and bards as they travelled from city to city, telling stories of the great figures of the past. Interestingly, there are also several works of literature dealing with the life of Naram-Sin. But unlike those of Sargon, they are more cautionary tales than stories of valour. The most famous of these being the Curse of Agade, a work of fiction loosely based around historical events. The Curse of Agade tells of the fall of Naram-Sin and the glorious city of Agade. For reasons unknown to Naram-Sin, Enlil, the chief deity of the Sumerian pantheon, withdraws his favour from the city. The Akkadian king implores the gods to give him a sign or an omen as to how he can win back their favour. But it's all in vain. After 7 years of frustration, in anger, Naram-Sin sends his men to destroy the Ekur, Enlil's holy sanctuary in the city of Nippur. As punishment for his actions, Enlil sends the mountain people known as the Gutians, along with famine, to ravage Agade and its people. The overall moral of the story is that no one should question the gods, let alone act with such haste and disrespect towards them. Archaeological findings, along with several texts from Naram-Sin's reign, tend to stand at odds with much of what's been described in the Curse of Agade. And yet, the events that may have ultimately brought about the city's downfall, namely Gutian attacks and widespread famine, do seem to have some basis in history. Albeit likely having taken place towards the end of the reign of his successor, perhaps later misconstrued by storytellers. In reality, Naram-Sin himself was a very pious individual who, as mentioned before, ordered the renovation of the Ekkor and made it grander than ever before. Regardless of their portrayals in later literature, both Sargon and Naram-Sin would be remembered for centuries to come as two of ancient Mesopotamia's most powerful rulers. Their stories and achievements would inspire many of the kings who would come after them to establish great empires of their own. The Akkadian rulers completely changed the landscape of the Near Eastern world forevermore. Gone were the days of petty city-states whose citizens fought wars over plots of farmland, and whose lives revolved around their patron deity. As part of the Akkadian state, these cities became part of a much larger and more dynamic political entity, unlike anything that had ever been seen before, thus laying the framework for all empires to follow. Sargon and his descendants opened up a whole new world for the people of the ancient Near East that was not sustained by might alone, but through fostering trade and the exchange of ideas with most of the known civilizations at the time. Not just this, but future empires of the Near East would all imitate aspects of the Akkadian model of administration and centralized government for at least 2 millennia after Agade's fall. And finally, the Akkadians gave the region and the surrounding areas their language, Akkadian, which became the lingua franca for the Near East until it was replaced by Aramaic nearly 1500 years later. Thanks for watching. My name's Pete Kelly. You've been watching History Time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to check out all the content I've already made on ancient history, and for much more in the future. And check out my other self-titled history channel too, for many more videos on history and archaeology. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.